The first thing you need to understand about betrayal is that it sounds different when you're not supposed to hear it. Laughter becomes sharper. Voices carry a smugness that cuts through walls like a blade through paper. I stood in my own hallway, briefcase still in hand, listening to my wife Tessa giggle into her phone like a teenager planning to sneak out past curfew. "Oh, Murray, you should have seen his face when I told him," Tessa was saying, her voice drifting from the living room, like some caveman discovering fire. "It's my body. My choice," I said. "What's he going to do? Chain me to the kitchen?" I set my briefcase down carefully, the way you handle explosives. 23 years of marriage, and I'd never heard her talk about me like I was some obstacle to navigate around rather than the man she promised to love and cherish. The man who worked 60-hour weeks so she could chase her dreams of becoming the next big thing in the beauty industry. "The contract is already signed," she continued, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Miles says the compensation will set us up for life. Well, set me up for life. Darren doesn't need to know all the details. Miles Harren." I should have known that walking piece of expensive cologne would be involved. Tessa's boss at the high-end salon chain, the kind of guy who wore $1,000 suits to Casual Friday and treated everyone around him like they existed solely for his entertainment. I'm Darren Halloway, by the way. 47 years old, IT systems engineer for a mid-sized logistics company. Not glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps the lights on in our modest 3-bedroom house in what used to be a working-class neighborhood before the developers discovered it and started calling it charming and authentic. He thinks I'm doing this out of the goodness of my heart. Tessa laughed again, and the sound made my chest tighten. Some fertility-challenged couple who needs help? If only he knew I'm carrying Miles's baby for $200,000, plus expenses. The hallway seemed to tilt slightly. Not from shock. I'd suspected something was happening between them for months. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way she'd started dressing like she was auditioning for a reality show about rich housewives. What caught me off guard was the calculated nature of it all. This wasn't some passionate affair that got out of hand. This was a business transaction. "The best part is the legal protection," she continued. "Miles had his lawyers draw up an airtight contract. Even if Darren finds out and tries to make trouble, there's nothing he can do. I'm not technically cheating. I'm providing a service." Murray's voice came through the speaker, tinny but audible. "What if he leaves you?" "Then he leaves me," Tessa said, and I could hear her shrug in her voice. "I'll have enough money to start over somewhere better, maybe California. Miles has connections there." I backed away from the living room entrance, my sock-covered feet silent on the hardwood floor. In the kitchen, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat at the table where we'd eaten breakfast together that morning, where she'd kissed my cheek and asked me to pick up groceries on the way home, where she'd acted like the woman I married instead of whatever she'd become. The thing about being an IT engineer is that you learn to think in systems. Every problem has a solution if you can identify all the variables and understand how they interact. What Tessa didn't know, what she'd never bothered to learn in all our years together, is that I'm very good at understanding systems, especially when those systems are designed to screw me over. I pulled out my phone and started making notes. Not emotional ranting or angry accusations, but a methodical list of facts and potential responses. If my wife wanted to treat our marriage like a business transaction, then maybe it was time I started thinking like a businessman too. The front door opened 20 minutes later, and Tessa walked in carrying shopping bags from stores I couldn't afford. She'd had her hair done, again, and was wearing a dress that cost more than most people's car payments. "Hey, honey," she said, bending down to kiss my forehead. The same forehead she'd been discussing like it belonged to some annoying roommate she was planning to ditch. "How was your day?" "Educational," I said, taking another sip of bourbon. "Yours?" "Oh, girl talk with Mariah. Planning some exciting changes." She moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, putting away organic groceries and artisanal products that had replaced the normal food we used to buy. Everything about her had become more expensive lately, more refined. I'd assumed it was part of working at the upscale salon, trying to fit in with a wealthier clientele. Now I understood it was preparation for a different life entirely. "Changes can be good," I said carefully, "as long as everyone's on the same page. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories." She glanced at me, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe, or calculation. Then she smiled, the same smile that had convinced me to propose all those years ago. "We should talk about that soon," she said. "There are some opportunities coming up that could really improve our situation." Our situation. as if we were partners in this decision instead of her having already signed contracts behind my back. "I'm looking forward to it," I said, and meant every word. That night, after Tessa had gone to bed early claiming a headache, I sat in my home office and did what I do best. I researched. Miles Harren had a surprisingly robust online presence for someone involved in shady dealings. Social media accounts, business profiles, charity involvement, even a few interviews in local business magazines. The kind of man who believed his own press releases. More importantly, he had the kind of digital footprint that leaves tracks everywhere. Email accounts, financial records, social connections, all of it interconnected in ways that most people never consider. When you spend your career managing information systems, you learn that privacy is mostly an illusion. Everything connects to everything else if you know where to look. By 3 a.m, I had a preliminary map of Miles Harren's life, business dealings, and personal relationships. I also had copies of Tessa's recent financial activity, downloaded from accounts she'd forgotten I had access to. Joint accounts we'd set up years ago for household expenses, back when we actually discussed major decisions together. The surrogacy contract was hidden in a folder on her laptop labeled Salon Training Materials. Either she thought I was too stupid to look, or too trusting to violate her privacy. She was wrong on both counts. Reading through the legal documents was like watching a magic trick in reverse, seeing exactly how the illusion was constructed. Miles got a baby with no legal obligations beyond the contracted payment. Tessa got $200,000 and a clean exit from our marriage if she wanted it. And I got to be the supportive husband who helped his wife fulfill her dream of helping others, right up until the moment she decided I was no longer useful. The contract was airtight, just like she'd told Marai. Miles's lawyers had done their job well, but here's what they hadn't counted on. Sometimes the best way to win a rigged game isn't to play by the rules. Sometimes you have to change the game entirely. I poured another bourbon and started planning. The next morning, Tessa was gone before I woke up. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "Early appointment. Back tonight. Love you." Written in her careful handwriting on expensive stationery. The kind of note that would look sweet and considerate to anyone who didn't know it was covering for a lie. I called in to work and took a personal day, something I hadn't done in over 2 years. My boss, Janet, didn't even question it. When you're the guy who keeps the servers running and never complains about overtime, you earn some flexibility. My first stop was downtown, to the office of Sidney Kellerman, attorney at law. Sidney and I had gone to high school together, back when he was just Sid, who helped me cheat on Spanish tests. Now he wore suits that cost more than my monthly salary and specialized in what he called creative legal solutions. "Darren Halloway," he said, standing up from behind a desk that probably cost more than my car. "This is unexpected. What brings you to my den of legal iniquity?" "Marriage problems," I said, settling into a leather chair that was more comfortable than my couch at home. "The kind that require creative solutions." Sidney's expression shifted from friendly to professional. "Divorce? Maybe eventually. Right now, I need to understand my options when my wife is using our joint assets to finance decisions I wasn't consulted about." I handed him printouts of the financial records I'd gathered. Sidney had always been good with numbers, even back in high school. Now he was better with loopholes. He reviewed the documents with the focused attention of a surgeon examining x-rays. After 10 minutes, he leaned back in his chair and smiled the way sharks probably smile when they smell wounded fish. "Your wife has been busy," he said, "and sloppy. These joint accounts she's been using for her personal expenses. Technically, you have equal access and equal authority over them." "Meaning?" "Meaning if you wanted to freeze these accounts pending a full financial review, you could do that. Today, if you wanted. It would take her weeks to get them unfrozen, assuming she could prove the expenses were legitimate joint marital decisions." I felt something loosen in my chest for the first time in days. "What about the surrogacy contract?" "That's trickier. The contract itself is between her and this Miles character, but..." He flipped through the pages again. "The initial medical expenses and legal fees were paid from joint accounts, without your consent or signature. That creates some interesting complications." "What kind of complications?" "The kind where you could argue that joint marital assets were used to facilitate an agreement that violates the terms of your marriage. Depending on how nasty you want to get, you could probably claim alienation of affection, breach of fiduciary duty, maybe even fraud." Sidney was warming to the topic now, his eyes bright with the possibility of a complex legal battle. "Of course, that would mean going to court, making everything public, probably ending your marriage in spectacular fashion." "What if I don't want spectacular? What if I want educational?" He raised an eyebrow. "Educational how?" "What if I wanted to make sure all parties involved understood the full consequences of their decisions? not necessarily through the courts, but through more direct means. Sidney leaned back in his chair, studying me with the expression he used to get when we were planning elaborate pranks in high school. How direct are we talking? Completely legal, but creative. Ah, he smiled. Creative I can work with. Let me make some calls. My second stop was Jackie's boxing gym, a converted warehouse in the part of town that gentrification hadn't reached yet. Jackie Morales had been my best friend since college, back when we were both young and stupid enough to think the world owed us something. Now he was the kind of guy who could get things done without asking too many questions about why they needed doing. I found him in his office, a cramped space above the main gym floor that smelled like leather and honest sweat. Jackie looked up from a stack of bills and grinned when he saw me. Darren, what brings you to my palace of pain? Finally ready to learn how to throw a proper punch? Maybe later. Right now I need advice about a different kind of fighting. His expression sobered. Jackie had been married 3 times, divorced twice, and was currently taking a break from his third wife. He understood relationship warfare better than most generals understood actual warfare. I gave him the abbreviated version of my situation, leaving out the specific details but hitting the main points. Wife, boss, money, betrayal, legal contracts designed to screw me over. So what do you want to do about it? He asked when I finished. I want them to understand that actions have consequences. I want them to learn that treating people like disposable assets is a dangerous game. Jackie nodded slowly. And you want to do this without ending up in handcuffs or paying alimony for the rest of your natural life. Exactly. He was quiet for a moment, listening to the sound of heavy bags being pounded in the gym below. You know what your problem is, Darren? You're too nice. You play by rules that other people ignore. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. I'm open to suggestions. Information is power, reputation is everything, and timing is crucial. He counted off on his fingers. You want to hurt them? Find out what they value most and threaten it. But do it smart. Do it so they can't trace it back to you and can't fight back without making things worse for themselves. Any ideas how? Jackie grinned. Oh, I've got ideas. But first, tell me more about this Miles character. Rich guys like that, they always have secrets. Now find the secrets, and you find the leverage. We talked for another hour, and by the time I left, I had the beginnings of a plan that was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential effectiveness. The kind of plan that would teach everyone involved that underestimating Darren Halloway was a mistake they'd only make once. My final stop of the day was the Meridian Salon, the upscale chain where Tessa worked and where Miles Harren held court like some kind of beauty industry emperor. I'd only been there a few times. Holiday parties, the occasional lunch date back when Tessa and I still did lunch dates. But I knew the layout, and more importantly, I knew the culture. High-end salons are ecosystems built on gossip, competition, and social hierarchy. Everyone knows everyone else's business, and information flows like water, finding the lowest point. If you wanted to destroy someone's reputation in that environment, you didn't need elaborate schemes or expensive lawyers. You just needed to know which buttons to push and when to push them. I parked across the street and watched the afternoon clientele come and go. Wealthy women with perfect hair and expensive handbags. The kind of people who paid more for a single appointment than most families spent on groceries in a month. Tessa's people now, or at least the people she wanted to become. Through the large windows, I could see her working at her station, animated and smiling as she styled some socialite's hair. She looked happy, confident, like a woman who'd found exactly where she belonged. What she didn't know was that belonging was about to become much more complicated. My phone buzzed with a text from Sydney. Account's frozen. She'll find out when she tries to use the cards. Call me tomorrow. Another text from Jackie. Found some interesting information about your friend Miles. We should talk. I smiled and started the car. The game was officially underway, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was playing to win instead of just trying not to lose. That evening, Tessa came home in a mood I hadn't seen in years. Excited, almost giddy, like she was carrying some wonderful secret that she couldn't wait to share. Darren, she said, practically bouncing on her toes, we need to talk. I have some incredible news. I'm listening, I said, settling into my chair with a fresh bourbon. She took a deep breath, composing herself like an actress preparing for an important scene. You know how we've always talked about financial security, about having enough money to really enjoy life instead of just surviving? I remember those conversations. Well, I've been presented with an opportunity, a chance to help someone while also setting us up for the future. She launched into her prepared speech about the surrogacy, painting it as a noble gesture that would also happen to solve all our financial problems. She was good at it. Convincing, earnest, hitting all the emotional notes about helping a childless couple achieve their dreams. If I hadn't already known the truth, I might have been impressed by the performance. $200,000, she said, watching my face carefully. Plus all medical expenses and a generous living allowance. It's a year of my life, Darren, but it could change everything for us. And you've already decided to do this? Well, I've been exploring the possibility, but I wanted to discuss it with you before making any final decisions. The lie came so smoothly that I almost believed she believed it herself. What does this couple know about us? About me? Nothing specific. The arrangement is completely confidential. They just want a healthy, responsible woman to help them have the family they've always wanted. And the father, is he involved in the process? Something flickered across her face, too quick to identify, but definitely there. Only for the medical procedures. Everything else is handled through lawyers and doctors. Very professional, very discreet. I nodded thoughtfully, playing the role of the husband who was hearing this for the first time. It's a big decision, life-changing, like you said. I know it is. That's why I wanted us to discuss it together, as partners. Partners. The word hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire. I think, I said carefully, that we should both take some time to think about all the implications. Make sure we understand exactly what we're getting into before we commit to anything. Relief flooded her face. She'd been expecting a fight, and instead I was being reasonable, supportive even. Of course, she said. We should be absolutely sure. Absolutely, I agreed. What I didn't tell her was that I was already sure. Sure that she'd made her choice without considering me. Sure that she was lying about almost everything, and sure that she was about to learn some very expensive lessons about the difference between being smart and being clever. The education was about to begin. Tessa discovered the frozen accounts 3 days later, during what should have been a routine shopping trip to prepare for her new lifestyle. I was at work when she called, and her voice had a pitch I hadn't heard since the early days of our marriage when she'd gotten her first credit card declined. Darren, there's something wrong with our accounts, she said without preamble. The cards aren't working, and when I called the bank, they said there's some kind of hold on everything. A hold? That's strange. Did they say why? Something about a financial review. They wouldn't give me details over the phone, said we both need to come in together to discuss it. I made appropriate concerned noises while mentally thanking Sydney for his efficiency. I can probably get away from work this afternoon. Want me to meet you at the bank? Yes, please. This is really embarrassing, Darren. I'm standing in the middle of Nordstrom with a cart full of things I can't pay for. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. These things happen with joint accounts sometimes. What I didn't mention was that these things happen specifically when one account holder requests a comprehensive audit of all transactions over the past 6 months. Sydney had been thorough. Every payment to medical facilities, legal offices, and luxury purchases that couldn't be justified as normal household expenses was now flagged for review. The bank meeting was exactly as uncomfortable as I'd hoped it would be. Tessa sat rigid in the customer service office while a polite but firm representative explained that the accounts would remain frozen until both account holders could provide documentation justifying several large and unusual expenditures. This is ridiculous, Tessa said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Those were legitimate expenses. I'm sure they were, Mrs. Halloway, but bank policy requires verification when there are significant changes in spending patterns, especially for large medical and legal payments. What kind of verification? The representative consulted her notes. Documentation showing that both account holders authorized the expenditures, contracts, agreements, medical records if applicable, the usual paperwork for major financial decisions. Tessa's face went pale. The surrogacy contract was in her name only, as were all the related medical consultations and legal fees. She'd used joint funds to pay for a unilateral decision, and now she was being asked to prove that it was actually a joint decision. How long will this take to resolve? I asked, playing the concerned husband. Once we receive all the necessary documentation, usually 7 to 10 business days for review. Outside the bank, Tessa was quiet until we reached our cars. Then the dam burst. This is humiliating, Darren. Do you have any idea how this looks? I had to abandon a shopping cart and walk out of the store like some kind of criminal. I'm sure it's just a routine audit. Banks do this sometimes when they see unusual activity. Unusual activity? Those were medical expenses. Medical expenses for what, exactly? The question hung between us like a landmine waiting for someone to step on it. She'd been so careful to present the surrogacy as something we were considering together, but the bank records told a different story. Records that showed months of payments to fertility clinics and lawyers, all made without my knowledge or consent. For the consultations, she said finally, to make sure I'm healthy enough for the surrogacy. Consultations that cost thousands of dollars before we'd even decided to move forward? I wanted to be prepared, to have all the information before we made our final decision. Another lie, smoother than the last, but still obviously fabricated. The medical record Sydney had requested would show that she wasn't just consulting, she was already well into the preliminary stages of the surrogacy process. Well, I said, I guess we'll find out soon enough. The bank will want to see all the contracts and agreements anyway. Her face went through several interesting color changes. Contracts? For the surrogacy. The bank will need to see the legal documents to understand why we were paying lawyers and medical facilities. Standard procedure for this kind of review. I could practically see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to explain a signed contract for a decision we were supposedly still discussing. Maybe we should talk to Sydney about this, get some legal advice. Good idea, I'll call him tomorrow. What I didn't tell her was that Sydney was already handling the legal aspects of the situation and that the bank review was just the opening move in a much larger game. That evening, while Tessa locked herself in the bedroom making urgent phone calls, I drove to Jackie's gym for what was becoming a regular strategy session. I found him closing up for the night, alone in the empty building except for the sound of the ventilation system and the distant hum of traffic. "How'd the bank meeting go?" he asked, not looking up from the equipment he was cleaning. Better than expected. She's starting to realize that her perfect plan has some complications. Good. And I've got some interesting information about your friend Miles that might complicate things even further. He handed me a folder filled with printouts and photographs. Turns out Mr. Harren has been playing this game for a while. 3 different women in the past 5 years, all employees or contractors connected to his businesses, all signed similar surrogacy contracts. I flipped through the documents, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. 3? 3 that I could find easily. There might be more. The interesting part is what happened to the women afterward. The photographs showed women who looked like variations of Tessa, attractive, ambitious, working in service industries that brought them into contact with wealthy clients. All of them had signed surrogacy contracts with Miles Harren. All of them had disappeared from their previous lives within a year. Disappeared how? Moved away, mostly. New cities, new jobs, new identities in some cases. One of them, a woman named Patricia Vance, started a salon in Phoenix with a mysterious cash investment. Another, Jennifer Walsh, bought a house in Denver and opened a boutique. All of them seem to be doing well, but none of them talk about their time working for Miles. Hush money? More like relocation packages. My guess is that Miles likes to keep his business arrangements clean and his former partners far away from his current operations. I studied the photographs, trying to imagine Tessa in a similar situation a year from now, living in some distant city with a new name and a cash-funded business, forbidden from ever talking about how she'd acquired her new life. There's more, Jackie continued. Miles Harren isn't just collecting babies from his employees. He's collecting leverage. Each of these women signed contracts that go way beyond simple surrogacy agreements, non-disclosure clauses, non-compete agreements, even restrictions on where they can live and work after the arrangement ends. Essentially making them disappear. Exactly. And if they ever try to cause problems for him, he's got enough legal ammunition to destroy them financially and professionally. I closed the folder, my mind already working through the implications. Tessa thought she was getting a simple business transaction, money for services rendered. What she was actually getting was a one-way ticket out of her current life, whether she wanted it or not. The question is, Jackie said, what do you want to do with this information? I want to make sure everyone understands exactly what they're getting into, starting with Miles. And how do you want to approach that? I thought about it for a moment, weighing options and consequences. Carefully, and publicly. Men like Miles Harren hate public attention, especially the wrong kind of public attention. You thinking about making some noise? I'm thinking about making sure his current business practices get the scrutiny they deserve, maybe starting with the other salon employees who might not know what they're signing up for. Jackie smiled the way he used to smile before big boxing matches, when he was confident about the outcome but excited about the fight itself. Information warfare. I like it. The best part is that it's all true. We're not making anything up or spreading false rumors. We're just making sure that people have access to information they might find useful. When do we start? Tomorrow. I want to visit the salon during peak hours, maybe have a conversation with some of Tessa's coworkers about their career opportunities. I drove home feeling better than I had in weeks. The frozen accounts were just the beginning. a way to get Tessa's attention and make her realize that her perfect plan wasn't as airtight as she'd thought. But the real campaign was about to begin, and it would target the source of the problem rather than just the symptoms. Miles Harren had built his little empire on the assumption that he could manipulate people without consequences, that his money and lawyers made him untouchable. He was about to learn that assumptions can be dangerous things, especially when they're built on incomplete information. Tessa was still on the phone when I got home, her voice carrying through the bedroom door in urgent, hushed tones. I could hear fragments of conversation. Complications, temporary setback, need to be patient? She was talking to Miles, trying to reassure him that everything was under control. What she didn't know was that control was an illusion, and illusions have a way of shattering when you examine them too closely. Tomorrow, we'd start examining Miles Harren's illusions very closely indeed. I poured myself a bourbon and settled into my chair, listening to my wife lie to her lover about problems she didn't even fully understand yet. The education was proceeding exactly as planned. The Meridian Salon on a Thursday afternoon was like a theater during intermission, all nervous energy and barely contained drama. I'd timed my visit for the busiest part of their day, when the staff would be stretched thin and distracted, perfect conditions for the kind of casual conversation that spreads through a workplace like wildfire. I brought flowers, a large, expensive arrangement that would draw attention and give me a legitimate reason for being there, the kind of gesture that would look romantic to observers while serving my actual purpose of gathering intelligence and planting seeds of doubt. Mr. Halloway, the receptionist, a young woman named Ashley who'd always been friendly during my previous visits, brightened when she saw me. "What a lovely surprise. Tessa didn't mention you were coming by." "I wanted to surprise her," I said, handing over the flowers. "Is she with a client?" "She's just finishing up a color treatment. Should be about 10 minutes. Would you like to wait?" "Actually, I was hoping to talk to Miles first. Is he available?" Ashley's expression shifted slightly, becoming more professional and cautious. "Mr. Harren is in a meeting. I could check if he's available to see you." "That would be great. Tell him it's about Tessa's career opportunities. I think he'll want to make time." While Ashley made the call, I surveyed the salon's main floor. It was exactly as I remembered, all glass and chrome and carefully orchestrated luxury, designed to make clients feel like they were part of something exclusive and important. The staff moved through the space with practiced efficiency, but I could see the tension underneath the polish. This was a workplace built on competition and hierarchy, where information was currency and secrets were leverage. "Mr. Harren will see you in his office," Ashley said, returning with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Third floor, elevator to your right." Miles Harren's office was a monument to expensive taste and subtle intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, while the walls displayed awards and photographs that documented his rise through the beauty industry. He sat behind a desk that probably cost more than most people's cars, wearing a suit that had been tailored to emphasize his success. "Darren," he said, standing to shake my hand with the kind of firm grip that was supposed to establish dominance. "This is unexpected. Ashley mentioned something about Tessa's career." "Among other things," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I wanted to discuss the opportunities you've been offering her. Tessa is a valuable member of our team. We're always looking for ways to help our best people advance. Including opportunities outside the traditional salon business?" Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify, but definitely there. "I'm not sure I follow." "The surrogacy arrangement. Tessa told me you've been very supportive of her decision to help a childless couple." Miles leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming carefully neutral. "That's a personal matter between Tessa and her clients. I've simply provided some guidance about the legal and medical aspects. Very generous of you, especially considering the financial commitment involved." "Financial commitment?" "The initial expenses, medical consultations, legal fees, lifestyle adjustments. Tessa mentioned that you've been covering some of those costs while we work out the details." This was a carefully constructed lie, designed to make Miles think that Tessa had told me more than she actually had. His reaction would tell me whether he was worried about my knowledge or confident in his legal protections. "I think there might be some confusion," he said carefully. "Any expenses related to Tessa's personal decisions are her responsibility." "Of course. I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page about expectations and obligations." We stared at each other across his expensive desk, two men having a conversation that was really about something else entirely. He was trying to figure out how much I knew and whether I represented a threat to his plans. I was trying to make him nervous enough to make mistakes. "Darren," he said finally, "I hope you understand that Tessa is an adult who's capable of making her own decisions about her body and her future." "Absolutely. just like I'm capable of making decisions about our shared assets and legal obligations. Another flicker, stronger this time. Legal obligations? Marriage creates all kinds of interesting legal connections. Joint property, shared debts, mutual responsibilities. When one spouse makes major decisions that affect both parties, it can create complications. What kind of complications? The kind that lawyers love and businessmen hate. Public complications, usually. Miles was fully focused now, his casual demeanor replaced by sharp attention. Are you threatening me, Darren? I'm having a conversation with my wife's boss about her career opportunities, just like any supportive husband would do. I stood up, smoothing down my shirt with the kind of casual gesture that suggested the meeting had been routine and pleasant. I should go find Tessa. Thank you for taking the time to chat. Darren? His voice stopped me at the door. I hope we understand each other. Perfectly, I said. I think we're going to understand each other very well. I left his office knowing that I'd accomplished exactly what I'd intended. Miles Harren was now wondering how much I knew, what I might do with that knowledge, and whether his carefully constructed arrangement was as secure as he'd thought. Uncertainty was a powerful weapon against men who were used to controlling every variable. Downstairs, I found Tessa finishing with her client, a well-dressed woman in her 60s who was examining her new hairstyle in the mirror with the critical attention of an art collector evaluating a painting. Mrs. Patterson, you look absolutely stunning, Tessa was saying, making final adjustments with the practiced skill that had made her successful in this business. This color is going to photograph beautifully at the charity gala. You think so? I want to look perfect for the cameras. There will be reporters there, you know. Society page coverage. Trust me, you'll be the most elegant woman there. Mrs. Patterson beamed and handed Tessa a tip that was probably more than most people made in a day. After she left, Tessa turned to me with surprise and what looked like genuine pleasure. Darren, what are you doing here? Brought you flowers, I said, gesturing toward the arrangement Ashley was putting in water. Thought you might need some cheering up after the bank situation. Her smile faltered slightly. That's sweet, but you didn't need to make a special trip. I also wanted to meet some of your coworkers. You talk about them so much, I felt like I should put faces to names. This was partially true. Tessa did talk about her coworkers, usually in the context of workplace drama and professional competition. What I really wanted was to start conversations that would eventually lead to questions about Miles Harren's business practices. Let me introduce you around, she said, but I could hear the reluctance in her voice. The next 20 minutes were educational in ways I hadn't expected. The salon staff was a complex ecosystem of personalities and ambitions, all of them navigating the politics of working for a demanding boss in a high-pressure environment. But more importantly, several of them had stories about Miles that painted a picture of a man who liked to blur the lines between professional and personal relationships. He's very hands-on, said Carmen, a stylist who'd been with the company for 3 years, always offering career advice, financial guidance, opportunities for advancement. What kind of opportunities? I asked. Special projects, private clients, sometimes arrangements that go beyond normal salon work. Sounds intriguing. Carmen glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. Between you and me, I think some of the girls have gotten involved in things that aren't exactly professional, if you know what I mean. I'm not sure I do. Personal services, for very wealthy clients who want more than just hair and makeup. The implication hung in the air between us. Carmen was suggesting that Miles Harren was running more than just a salon. He was facilitating arrangements between his female employees and wealthy men who were looking for companionship that went beyond professional services. Has anyone ever complained about these arrangements? Not officially, but I've noticed that some of the girls who get involved in the special projects tend to move on pretty quickly. New cities, new jobs, always with enough money to start over somewhere else. Sounds like generous severance packages. Or hush money, Carmen said quietly. I filed this information away for future use. Miles Harren wasn't just manipulating individual women like Tessa. He was running a systematic operation that used financial pressure and career opportunities to recruit women for wealthy clients. The surrogacy arrangements were just one part of a larger business model. Darren? Tessa appeared at my elbow, looking slightly strained. Ready to go? Just getting to know your work family, I said. Carmen was telling me about the career advancement opportunities here. Tessa's expression tightened. We should probably head home. I have an early day tomorrow. On the way to our cars, she was quiet until we reached the parking lot. Then she turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Part anger, part fear, all calculation. What were you really doing here, Darren? Bringing you flowers, meeting your coworkers, being a supportive husband. Carmen said you were asking a lot of questions about Miles and his business practices. I'm curious about the man who's been such a mentor to my wife. Is that a problem? It could be. Miles values discretion above everything else. He doesn't like people poking around in his affairs. His affairs? The word choice was interesting and probably more revealing than she'd intended. His business affairs, his client relationships, the way he runs his company. I'm sure he runs a very professional operation. He does, and he expects the same professionalism from everyone around him, including the families of his employees. There it was, the implicit threat wrapped in reasonable language. Miles Harren expected me to stay out of his business, and Tessa was delivering that message on his behalf. I understand completely, I said. Professional boundaries are important in any business relationship. Good. I'm glad we're on the same page. We weren't on the same page. We weren't even reading the same book. But I let her think otherwise because the last thing I wanted was for her to realize how much I'd learned and what I planned to do with that information. That night, I called Sydney with an update on the day's intelligence gathering. He listened without interruption while I described my conversations with Miles and Carmen, taking notes and asking occasional clarifying questions. So we're not just dealing with a simple surrogacy arrangement, he said when I finished. This sounds like a pattern of behavior that could have serious legal implications. What kind of implications? If Miles is using his position as an employer to coerce female employees into personal arrangements with wealthy clients, that's potentially criminal. Labor law violations, at minimum, possibly human trafficking if the arrangements involve coercion or deception. And if we could document this pattern, then Mr. Harren would have much bigger problems than one angry husband, the kind of problems that make the front page of newspapers and attract federal investigators. I smiled, feeling pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. How would someone go about documenting something like that? Hypothetically, they'd need testimony from multiple victims, financial records showing payments, and evidence of the systematic nature of the operation. The kind of evidence that might be available if someone with the right technical skills knew where to look. Hypothetically. Of course, and hypothetically, if such evidence existed, it might be in everyone's best interest to make sure the appropriate authorities became aware of it. I'll keep that in mind. After I hung up, I sat in my home office and started planning the next phase of the campaign. Miles Harren thought he was dealing with one angry husband who could be managed through intimidation and legal threats. What he was actually dealing with was a systematic investigation that would expose his entire operation to the kind of scrutiny that men like him spent their lives avoiding. The education was about to become much more comprehensive. The charity gala at the Grand Meridian Hotel was exactly the kind of event that Miles Harren used to showcase his success and network with potential clients. 500 of the city's wealthiest residents all gathered to support children's literacy while demonstrating their own social status. It was also the perfect venue for the kind of public education I had in mind. I'd spent 2 weeks preparing for this night, gathering evidence and coordinating with Sydney to ensure that everything we planned was legal, documented, and devastating. The guest list read like a directory of the city's power structure: politicians, business leaders, socialites, and media personalities, all of them dressed in formal wear and armed with smartphones. Tessa had been excited about the gala for months, back when she thought it would be a celebration of her new life and elevated social status. She'd bought an expensive dress with money from our joint account before the freeze, and spent hours planning her appearance like a general preparing for battle. "This is important, Darren," she'd said that morning while getting ready. "Miles is being honored tonight for his charitable work. There will be reporters, photographers, influential people who could help my career." "Our career," I'd corrected gently. "Right, our future." What she didn't know was that Miles Harren's charitable work was about to receive a different kind of attention than he'd been expecting. The hotel ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers, silk-draped tables, a stage where local celebrities would present awards and deliver speeches about the importance of education. I'd arrived early and positioned myself near the bar, where I had a clear view of the main entrance and the media area where reporters were setting up their equipment. Miles entered like royalty, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary and accompanied by a small entourage of business associates and salon employees. Tessa was among them, radiant in her expensive dress and clearly thrilled to be part of the inner circle. What Miles didn't notice was the woman standing near the registration table, holding a press badge and a digital recorder. Jennifer Walsh, one of the former employees Jackie had tracked down, had agreed to attend the gala as a freelance journalist covering the event for a local lifestyle magazine. She'd also agreed to ask some very specific questions if the opportunity presented itself. The first hour of the event proceeded normally. Cocktails, networking, the usual social maneuvering that characterized these gatherings. Miles worked the room like a politician, shaking hands and making small talk with potential clients and business partners. Tessa stayed close to his side, playing the role of successful protege rather than secret surrogate mother. I waited until the formal program began before making my first move. While Miles was on stage accepting his humanitarian award, I approached several reporters and mentioned that I had some interesting background information about the honoree's business practices. Nothing dramatic or accusatory, just a suggestion that there might be more to the story than the official narrative. "What kind of background information?" asked Rebecca Martinez, an investigative reporter for the city's largest newspaper. "The kind that shows how Mr. Harren's mentorship of young women extends beyond traditional business relationships," I said, handing her a folder containing copies of the contracts and financial records Sydney had helped me compile. All public information, but arranged in a way that tells an interesting story. Rebecca flipped through the documents, her expression becoming more focused as she recognized the implications of what she was seeing. "These are surrogacy contracts. Among other things, notice the pattern of employees, the financial arrangements, and what happens to the women afterward. This suggests a systematic operation. That would be for you to determine. I'm just a concerned citizen who thinks the public has a right to know how their charitable donations are supporting business practices." While Rebecca studied the documents, I moved to the next phase of the plan. Jennifer Walsh had positioned herself near the media area, and when Miles finished his acceptance speech, she approached him with her recorder and press credentials. "Mr. Harren, congratulations on your award. I'm working on a feature story about successful entrepreneurs who give back to their communities. Could I ask you a few questions about your business philosophy?" Miles was clearly pleased by the attention. "Of course. I'm always happy to discuss the importance of supporting young people's dreams." "Speaking of supporting dreams, I understand you've been particularly generous in helping female employees advance their careers through special opportunities. I believe in empowering women to take control of their financial futures, including opportunities in surrogacy arrangements." Miles's expression changed, becoming more cautious. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I have information suggesting that you've facilitated surrogacy contracts between employees and wealthy clients. Can you comment on that?" "No comment," Miles said, turning away from the recorder. But Jennifer wasn't finished. "What about Patricia Vance, who moved to Phoenix after working for you? Or Carmen Rodriguez, who relocated to Denver? Both women received substantial financial settlements after signing contracts related to personal services." "I don't discuss former employees." "Even when those employees were paid significant sums to relocate and sign non-disclosure agreements?" Miles was visibly uncomfortable now, looking around for security or an escape route. But Jennifer had done her homework, and she pressed the advantage. "Mr. Harren, are you operating a business that uses employment opportunities to recruit women for wealthy clients seeking personal services, including surrogacy?" "This interview is over," Miles said, but his voice was loud enough to attract attention from other reporters and nearby guests. That was my cue for the final phase. I approached the growing crowd around Miles and Jennifer, carrying a manila envelope that contained the most damaging evidence Sydney and I had compiled. "Excuse me," I said to the reporters, "but I think you might find this information relevant to your story." I handed over copies of bank records showing payments from Miles's business accounts to multiple women over the past 5 years, all of them corresponding to dates when employees had left the company and relocated to distant cities. The pattern was unmistakable, and the amounts were substantial, exactly the kind of evidence that turned speculation into front-page news. "What is this?" Miles demanded, but his voice had lost its authority. "Public records," I said calmly. "Financial transactions that show how you've been using your businesses to facilitate arrangements between wealthy clients and vulnerable employees." "You have no right." "I have every right to share public information with journalists who are investigating matters of public interest." The crowd around us was growing, and I could see other guests pulling out their phones to record the confrontation. Miles Harren's charitable evening was becoming a very different kind of media event. "Darren." Tessa appeared at my elbow, her face pale with confusion and growing horror. "What's happening?" "Your husband is making some very serious accusations," Miles said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Not accusations," I corrected. "Documentation. There's a difference." Rebecca Martinez had been reviewing the bank records while listening to our exchange. Now she looked up with the expression of a reporter who'd just discovered a major story. "Mr. Harren, these records show payments totaling over $2 million to former female employees over the past 5 years. Can you explain the nature of these payments?" "Severance packages. Perfectly legal business expenses. Severance packages that require the recipients to relocate to specific cities and sign extensive non-disclosure agreements." Miles looked around the ballroom, clearly realizing that his carefully constructed world was collapsing in the most public way possible. The other guests were watching with the fascinated attention that people reserve for spectacular disasters, and several more reporters had joined the growing crowd. "This is harassment," he said finally. "I'm being targeted by a disgruntled employee's husband who's trying to interfere with legitimate business relationships." "Legitimate business relationships?" I repeated. "Is that what you call manipulating employees into surrogacy arrangements with wealthy clients?" "I don't manipulate anyone. I provide opportunities for women who want to improve their financial situations. By carrying babies for rich men who want to avoid the complications of traditional relationships?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I could see Miles calculating whether to deny it or try to justify it. Either choice would be damaging, but denial would be provably false given the evidence that was now in the hands of multiple reporters. "I provide legal services," he said finally. "Everything I do is completely within the law." "Legal doesn't mean ethical," Jennifer Walsh said, still recording. "And it doesn't mean your employees are making truly informed decisions about what they're agreeing to." "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that you use your position as an employer to identify vulnerable women, then manipulate them into arrangements that benefit you and your wealthy clients while leaving them isolated and dependent on your continued discretion." Miles was losing control of the narrative, and everyone in the ballroom could see it. His face was flushed, his voice was becoming defensive, and his usual smooth confidence had been replaced by obvious desperation. "Darren," Tessa said quietly, "we need to talk. Now." "Actually," said Rebecca Martinez, "I'd like to get Mrs. Halloway's perspective on this story. Ma'am, are you currently involved in one of these surrogacy arrangements?" Tessa looked like she'd been slapped. That's personal." "Not when it involves potential labor law violations and systematic exploitation of employees." "I'm not being exploited. I made my own choice. Based on complete information about Mr. Harren's business practices and the experiences of other women who've been in similar situations." Tessa looked at Miles, clearly expecting him to rescue her from the increasingly hostile questioning. But Miles was dealing with his own crisis and had no resources left to protect anyone else. "I think," I said into the growing silence, "that everyone here tonight has learned something valuable about the difference between charity and exploitation." The ballroom had gone quiet except for the sound of camera phones recording and reporters taking notes. Miles Harren's moment of charitable recognition had become a public exposure of business practices that would be front-page news by morning. "This isn't over," Miles said to me, his voice low and threatening. "You're absolutely right," I replied. "It's just beginning." As security finally arrived to restore order, I walked away from the wreckage of Miles Harren's reputation and Tessa's dreams of easy money. The education had been more comprehensive than I'd originally planned, but sometimes the best lessons are the ones that teach multiple people simultaneously. Outside the hotel, I called Sidney to let him know that the evening had proceeded exactly as planned. "How do you think it went?" he asked. "I think," I said, watching reporters interview shocked gala guests on the hotel steps, "that everyone involved learned some valuable lessons about the consequences of treating people like disposable assets." The real education, however, was just beginning. The story broke across multiple platforms simultaneously, like a coordinated military strike against Miles Harren's carefully constructed reputation. Rebecca Martinez's front-page expose in the morning paper was followed by television coverage, online articles, and social media posts that turned the charity gala confrontation into a viral sensation. "Local businessman accused of exploiting female employees in surrogacy scheme" was the headline that greeted me over my morning coffee. The article was thorough, well-researched, and devastating. Rebecca had used the information I'd provided as a starting point for a deeper investigation that revealed the full scope of Miles's operation. The financial records told a clear story. Over 5 years, Miles Harren had facilitated arrangements between wealthy clients and female employees that went far beyond traditional business relationships. The surrogacy contracts were just one part of a larger system that used employment opportunities to recruit vulnerable women for personal services that made Miles and his clients wealthy while leaving the women dependent on his discretion and bound by extensive legal agreements. Tessa hadn't come home the night before. After the confrontation at the gala, she disappeared with Miles and his remaining supporters, probably to some crisis management meeting where lawyers and public relations specialists tried to figure out how to contain the damage. She'd sent a single text message around midnight. "Staying at Murray's tonight. We need to talk tomorrow." My phone had been ringing constantly since the story broke. Reporters wanting follow-up interviews, lawyers representing other potential victims, and curious neighbors who'd seen our names in the paper. I'd turned off the ringer and let everything go to voicemail while I enjoyed my coffee and watched Miles Harren's world collapse in real time. The television coverage was particularly satisfying. The local morning show had obtained footage from the gala, including the confrontation between Miles and the reporters. Watching him try to maintain his composure while his carefully constructed lies fell apart was better than any entertainment I'd paid for in years. The allegations against Miles Harren raise serious questions about labor practices in the beauty industry, the news anchor was saying. City officials have announced a formal investigation into his business operations, and federal authorities are reviewing the case for possible human trafficking violations. Human trafficking. Sydney had been right about the potential legal implications. What had started as my personal revenge against a man who was manipulating my wife had become a federal investigation into systematic exploitation of vulnerable women. My phone buzzed with a text from Jackie. Saw the news? Well played. Coffee later? Another text from Sydney. Excellent work. Several more women have contacted my office. This is going to be bigger than we thought. I was finishing my second cup of coffee when Tessa's key turned in the front door. She looked like she hadn't slept, her expensive dress wrinkled and her carefully styled hair disheveled. But more than that, she looked defeated in a way I'd never seen before. We need to talk, she said without preamble. I'm listening. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared breakfast and dinner for over 20 years, where we'd discussed our dreams and plans back when we were still partners instead of adversaries. You destroyed everything, she said quietly. I revealed the truth. There's a difference. Miles's business is ruined. His reputation is destroyed. The salon is probably going to close. And you're concerned about Miles because... She looked at me with something that might have been hatred or might have been despair. Because he was offering me a chance at a better life. A better life that involved carrying his baby and then disappearing to some distant city where you'd never be allowed to talk about how you got your money. You don't understand. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, Tessa. You just didn't bother to research what happened to the other women who made the same deal. I pulled out copies of the articles about Patricia Vance, Jennifer Walsh, and the other women who'd been through Miles's system. Phoenix, Denver, Seattle, Portland, all of them relocated with substantial cash payments and legal agreements that essentially erased their previous lives. She read through the documents with growing confusion and what looked like genuine surprise. I didn't know about the others. Because Miles didn't want you to know. Information is power, and he kept all the power by making sure you only knew what he wanted you to know. But the money was real. The opportunity was real. The opportunity to become a kept woman in a distant city, cut off from everyone you've ever known and legally prevented from ever discussing how you got there. That was your better life? She was quiet for a long time, staring at the newspaper articles and financial records spread across our kitchen table. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. What happens now? Now you decide what kind of person you want to be. The federal investigation is going to require testimony from all the women who were involved in Miles's arrangements. You can cooperate and help make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else, or you can try to protect him and probably end up facing charges yourself. Charges? Conspiracy, fraud, tax evasion. Sydney says there are multiple potential charges depending on how deep your involvement goes and whether you were a victim or a willing participant. The color drained from her face. I was a victim. I didn't know about the other women or the pattern of behavior. That's what you'll need to convince a federal prosecutor, and a jury, if it comes to that. She put her head in her hands, finally understanding the full scope of what she'd gotten involved in. I thought I was being smart, taking control of my financial future. You thought you were smarter than everyone else. That's different. And now? Now you deal with the consequences of your choices, just like everyone else has to. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Through the window, I could see a woman in a business suit holding a briefcase and official-looking credentials. Mrs. Halloway, the woman said when I opened the door. I'm Agent Patricia Chen with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I'd like to ask you some questions about your relationship with Miles Harren and the Meridian Salon Group. Tessa's education was about to become much more comprehensive than either of us had anticipated. The next several hours were a blur of questions, documents, and legal procedures that transformed our kitchen into an impromptu FBI field office. Agent Chen was thorough, professional, and clearly well prepared for the interview. She'd done her homework on Miles's operation and was particularly interested in Tessa's role in the surrogacy arrangement. Mrs. Halloway, when did you first become aware that Mr. Harren had similar arrangements with other employees? Yesterday, Tessa said quietly. At the gala. That was the first time I heard about other women. And you signed the surrogacy contract without knowing about these precedents? Yes, Miles presented it as a unique opportunity to help a childless couple while improving my own financial situation. Did he mention that the arrangement would require you to relocate after the birth? He said it might be advisable for privacy reasons, but he made it sound optional. Agent Chen made notes while Tessa answered questions about the timeline of her involvement, the financial arrangements, and her understanding of what she was agreeing to. It became clear that Tessa had been manipulated just like the other women, but that her ignorance wouldn't necessarily protect her from legal consequences. Mrs. Halloway, we're going to need you to cooperate fully with this investigation. That means providing all documents related to your arrangement with Mr. Harren, testifying before a grand jury if required, and being available for additional interviews as the case develops. What if I refuse? Then you'll be treated as a potential co-conspirator rather than a victim. I'd strongly advise against that approach. After Agent Chen left, Tessa and I sat in our kitchen, surrounded by the debris of our marriage and her shattered dreams of easy money. The house felt different somehow, like a stage set after the play has ended and the audience has gone home. I'm sorry, she said finally. For which part? The affair, the lies, the attempt to steal our joint assets, or the federal investigation? All of it. I thought I was being smart, but I was just being selfish and stupid. Yes, you were. Can you forgive me? I looked at my wife of 23 years, sitting across from me in her wrinkled gala dress with her makeup smeared and her carefully constructed new life in ruins around her. She looked younger somehow, more like the woman I'd married before ambition and dissatisfaction had turned her into someone I didn't recognize. I don't know, I said honestly. Forgiveness is different from trust, and trust is what makes a marriage work. I know I broke that. You didn't break it. You took it out back and shot it, then buried the body and pretended it never existed. She winced at the harshness of my words, but didn't argue with their accuracy. What happens to us now? Now you deal with the federal investigation and figure out how to rebuild a life that doesn't depend on manipulating other people or making deals with criminals. And us? Our marriage? I looked around our kitchen, remembering all the conversations we'd had at this table over the years, planning vacations, discussing career changes, arguing about money and dreams and the future we thought we were building together. I don't know, I said again. Ask me after the trial. The next morning brought more news coverage, more phone calls, and more evidence that Miles Harren's operation had been even more extensive than anyone had initially realized. Women from other cities were coming forward with similar stories, and federal investigators were expanding their inquiry to include potential violations in multiple states. Tessa had moved into the guest bedroom, and we were navigating around each other like polite strangers, sharing a temporary space. The intimacy and partnership that had defined our marriage for over 2 decades had been replaced by careful courtesy and mutual wariness. But something else had changed, too. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life, instead of being manipulated by other people's secret agendas. The revenge I'd planned had been more successful than I'd dared to hope, but more importantly, it had restored my sense of agency in a situation where I'd been treated like an irrelevant obstacle. Miles Harren was facing federal charges that could result in decades in prison. His business empire was collapsing as clients fled and employees sought new jobs. His reputation was destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery. Tessa was cooperating with federal investigators and trying to figure out how to rebuild a life that didn't depend on other people's money or influence. And I was sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and reading newspaper articles about the downfall of people who had underestimated the consequences of treating others as disposable assets. The education had been more comprehensive than I'd originally planned, but sometimes the best lessons are the ones that teach everyone involved something valuable about the price of arrogance and the power of information in the right hands. Justice, I reflected, sometimes looks a lot like revenge, but it feels much more satisfying when it's served with a side of federal prosecution.